Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for joining us on the live stream. Welcome to the gallery. And yeah, whether you're online or in person, this is really cool having it kind of both ways. We are here with Cleveland-based emerging artist Orlando Caraballo to explore his show titled Capicú, right? For those joining us online, this show will remain up through March 4th, and our regular gallery hours are Wednesday through Saturday from 11 to 4. So you can get a chance to see the work in person, which I definitely recommend. A quick thank you to our sponsors, the GAR Foundation, the Akron Community Foundation, the Ohio Arts Council, the Leonard Family Foundation, Brennan Family Foundation, the Knight Foundation, and the Char and Chuck Fowler Family Foundation, and the Corbin Foundation. Okay, I'm going to turn it over, and we'll get started.
Wonderful. Thank you. I also want to extend my thanks to everyone who's here, for all the foundations that made this possible. People just come on in. You don't have to be all the way in the cut. So my name is Orlando Caraballo. I'm a Puerto Rican artist from Cleveland. And I'm just really happy to be here. I'm happy to see all of your faces here and talk a little bit about what this show is about. And actually, I'm pretty excited to actually do a walkthrough of individual pieces, which the last time I showed this work, I didn't get the opportunity to do as much. So before we kind of break down into individual works, I'll just set the scene. So Capicú is essentially a term from the game of Puerto Rican dominoes. And if you're not familiar with what it means, it's essentially this point in the game of dominoes where you and your teammate strategically work toward finishing the game with one last domino that could be played on either end of the board. And so that's like a rare instance in dominoes, and even for losers, it's like a celebratory thing, because part of what that whole thing is about strategy and sort of responding to your teammate and responding to your opposition so that you have an opportunity to win with your own agency, with your own choice. And so thinking about such a simple concept expanded into sort of a life philosophy is really where I started off with this show. So imagine thinking about that terminology in response to life events and particular growth patterns in a person's development, in this case my personal development and the development of my family. And so that's really where this work sort of sets the scene. There's some historical basis for what Capicú means beyond what it means in the game of dominoes. And actually, I'll say that now. So Capicú is a Corsican word. And so back in the 1600s, when Puerto Rico was still under Spanish rule, the King of Spain set out to essentially tell any European, not just Spaniard, but any European, to come and take land and space on the island to decimate the population that was there, the indigenous people there. And so there's actually an island called Corsica that's in between France and Spain that has a very similar climate to Puerto Rico. And so a lot of those people who were from Corsica also grew coffee. So a lot of those people brought all that knowledge to actually my parents' hometown in Yauco, which is why Yauco, Puerto Rico is such a coffee town. It's like one of the biggest Caribbean ports for coffee in the entire Western Hemisphere. So there's like a lot of ties in between what that word means and where it came from and how it sort of fizzled into the culture. And Capicú itself actually translates into chapter. So this work has that meaning of what it means in the game of dominoes, but also this idea of what it means to open and close a chapter and sort of see life as a way, just sort of see life for the different parts that it is. So this show really embodies that in a lot of different ways. And for the first time, really, in a really focused effort, it really includes all of the different things that impacted my experience, not just my own experience, but my parents and the generation and two generations before me, and how their life stories sort of impacted my place in the world. and how I'm sort of understanding my own development, how I grieve, how I have grieved, and how I continue to grieve, how I continue to grow, and sort of expand who I am and who I want to be. So that's really what this show is about. It's essentially about capitalizing and holding all of this history and making better choices with it, having those things in context. And so that's really where we'll start. I think this one might be sort of the encapsulating image for the show. So this piece is called An Hourglass at Water's Edge, 5-1. And it really is about holding that history. So the background of this image is actually a Kodak photograph that I was able to scan while archiving my family's photographs throughout the process of making this work. And it's from August of 1972. It's my mother, her siblings, and my grandfather hanging out at Edgewater Park. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Edgewater in Cleveland, but it's sort of a really popular place for families to gather and have a good Sunday or Saturday afternoon. And so finding that image while archiving and looking through all these photographs, I also found images of me and my siblings and my mom at Edgewater Park in the same exact area on the beach. So I started making a lot of connections across time to the same places. And so this piece was really about me sort of existing in that frame, in between different life events. So my mom is actually back here in the corner, behind her sisters and her brother, and here she is burying me in the sand. So it's really just about holding all of those things. Spread out throughout the piece, there are these really tiny poems. You can't really see it obviously from where you are now, but I do encourage you once I finish the talk, to sort of spend some time looking through these pieces, because I think of them as like video games, like Easter eggs. I like putting little Easter eggs in my work, so I could kind of check the pulse, and if people are looking closely and paying attention. And I think this piece is a really good example of that. And also this piece has these domino references. So you'll see throughout the show that a lot of these pieces are paired with dominoes. And there's a rhyme and reason to it. It's not just random, I promise. What I can tell you is, when you're playing the game of dominoes, if you ever play a double-sided domino, you're essentially forcing your opponent to have to play off of that domino. And every time you see a double-sided domino in this work, it's connected to a life event that I'm depicting that I didn't choose to happen, but it's something I had to respond to. Mm-hmm. And so when you're walking through the show, keep that in mind as I sort of tell these stories that are connected to any of these individual pieces. And of course, when a domino does not have a double-sided domino and it's any other kind, it's referencing a point where I made a decision for myself using my own agency based off of something that happened to me. So all of that is here, and so I don't know if we should just go in order, but
you take us.
I guess we could start here. Who wants to go around here?
Thank you.
So this piece might actually be the oldest piece in this entire show, and it's the one I think I worked on the longest in terms of its inception time. But this piece is called Jíbaro, Los Macheteros. And again, similar to what this piece is doing, it's conflating multiple different points in history together to talk about sort of a lineage and understanding of what it took for me to exist. I think a lot of the show is what it took for me to be here and what I'm doing with what I've been given. So in this piece, in the background is actually an image from the Library of Congress, and it's of some indentured servants in the sugarcane fields in Puerto Rico, working, doing labor for the day. And so that was really only 2.5 generations before my father, and even his father, and his father's father would have been working out in fields like this. So that work ethic, that sort of mentality of putting in a good day's worth of work and just providing for your family, is depicted in that photo, and it kind of translates directly into my father standing in front of his what I think is a Buick or an Oldsmobile when he first came to the States, wearing his nice little clothes and having, well, the colors are faded when I archived it, but even the idea of having colored photographs and like being able to show your wealth or kind of be proud of what you have, he was able to do so. And it's also the first piece in this that you'll see that it has this character, this avatar, and there's a whole lot of story behind that, and I'll be breaking it down as we go deeper into the show. But for now, his name is Baroncito. And for those of you who are familiar with The Little Prince, is anyone familiar? He's basically a Puerto Rican brown boy version of The Little Prince. I'm a huge fan of The Little Prince, especially because of how that book deals with childhood, sort of a rite of passage and dealing with grief and loss, and also gaining and accepting. So that character means a lot in my work, and he constantly reappears throughout these images. And I think we'll actually jump over to these two pieces here, because this work isn't particularly linear. It can tell a story, but I think much like the process of me making it, I'm jumping all over time. I'm jumping throughout like my own present day experiences. There are things that are like right in the moment that I'm responding to. Then there are these photographs. There are these poems that were either I've written or these writings that I've collected from family members that I found through archiving that are all influencing the trajectories and sort of the process of how I'm making this work. But these particular pieces, they weren't able to be paired in this way the last time I showed this work, so I'm excited to have them in this way here. But these are some of the newer works, and I made these during the pandemic. I shifted to a lot of digital work in the pandemic because I didn't really have a fully loaded studio space and access to all sorts of equipment and materials. So this was another way for me to process and conflate the different drawings and artworks that I was making. But in these two particular pieces, I think they're probably the most sort of present and guttural in the show in terms of like responding to things that I was going through right in those moments. So Almost August was made in 2020, pretty much after the first 6 or 7 months of the pandemic. So for those of you who have MacBooks and updated their computers that year, this blanket that I'm kind of holding is a screensaver for the MacBooks of like 2020, I believe. And so, because I was looking at it every single day, and so it sort of became, it's me referencing hiding behind the screen because the screen is the only way I could access the outside world in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. And so that's like one example of sort of directly referencing my immediate experiences. And all throughout the piece are these little snippets of poems that I had written during this time. I wasn't making a whole lot of artwork. These pieces, some of these pieces are some of the only things I made during that stint in the pandemic. But I was doing a lot of writing, and this was the first work that I started really incorporating pieces of those writing, similar to what I did in that first piece with the Easter eggs and sort of hiding things in plain sight. And so, so that's where this piece sort of comes from. And it's a self-portrait in a lot of ways. It was the first self-portrait I had done since the pandemic had started. And the first one I think I had done for probably 3 or 4 years before that point. So it was a way for me to sort of recalibrate where I was at. And the piece next to it has a sort of similar immediacy. So this piece is called Vertigo, The Unbearable Lightness of Being. And, the story behind it has a lot of weight, and I won't necessarily go too deep into all the specifics of the story, but I will say that the work embodies this sense of not feeling very grounded in one's experience, and even the images, so the images the image that kind of comprises the shirt of this particular figure was sent to me by a loved one who was going through a very difficult time. And these objects really grounded him in his experience. and really served as an expression of who he was or who he felt he was at that time. And the way I constructed the face, and even the way I've stacked some of these objects, and some of these design and aesthetic elements, was really about being in conversation and in deep connection, and serving as a support system for the person that this piece is about. And so even this particular sort of like third eye, like stained glass looking circle in the center was actually a drawing that this person drew for me while he was recovering in the hospital. And so a lot of these things are directly from and are borrowing from sort of the dialogical experience I was having with this person. And the stones that he's balancing on his head are actually stones that he gifted me. And so it sort of serves as a memorial to that experience, and sort of me reflecting and sort of interpreting what I believed was going on and through our exchanges. So that's where we are with that. And I think we'll jump over to here because I actually do believe that the vertigo work and this work of my father in the wheelchair are directly connected. So you can come on over here because we're going to start getting deep into the show now. So this piece is called Los Lados, Luz un Día. And this particular piece, it took me a long time to make because it was very difficult to make. And so one thing I guess I didn't mention was a lot of the reason why I'm even an artist is because my father passed away when I was 12, and art was really the only way I could process my grief, and sort of externalize all this internalized feelings I was experiencing at the time. And throughout my sort of trajectory as an artist, I danced with and away and back toward dealing with this grief through my artwork. And this show really exists as a way to sort of finalize and close out some work I was doing during my BFA back in 2018, which I didn't think was fully realized, and now I feel like I kind of brought it full circle. But so my father in that piece he's in this piece as well, and he's in several other works here. But this particular piece really brought the archiving aspect of this work home for me. So when I was scanning a lot of these source images and trying to get the highest resolution, obviously I was handling a lot of material. I was sort of filling the paper, flipping it over, seeing if there were any hidden messages, or how people handwrite on the back of their photos. And there were photos that I found around this time period after my father had lost his leg in a car accident, where he was going through a very difficult and tumultuous time in his life. Not having a leg, but having been a mechanic and a carpenter, he was going through this very interesting sort of refocusing of what he could actually do with his body in relationship to the work that provided him meaning. And so I think a lot of this time he was in deep reflection. And this piece was made in 2020 and finished in 2021. And I started to draw a lot of comparisons between what he must have been feeling in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, and what I was feeling during the pandemic and feeling isolated and not very sure about who I was or what I could do with my time and my energy and my life. And so I had really this composition, and I had redrawn him, and I added this sort of visual weight with these sort of ghostly, skeletal figures sort of enveloping his sort of headspace. But I had found some other images from this time, and on the back of them was this poem that he had written in February of 1991, which was 20 years, or 30 years before, obviously, the pandemic. And so, what it says in Spanish, a un lado la luz, al otro lado la oscuridad, pero la oscuridad puede ser luz un día. And what that means in English is, on one side is light, and on the other side is darkness. But light can become, or darkness can become light one day. And that was, I think, his third or fourth note in a row. And I started to see the progression. Like, he started off in a really dark place of what he was writing, and that was the last thing he had said in that series of photos he was scribing on. And I felt that that was an appropriate thing to put alongside this particular imagery. And in the original photograph, he was facing to the left. And so I had inverted it because I wanted it, because when you face right, you think about progression, you think about moving forward. And so I wanted to shift that and also add this flower motif, which is in a couple other works as well, to show that there is a ray of hope, there's a nugget or a seed that's being planted that will grow into something more beautiful, even if the current experience has a bunch going on and is really difficult to get through. So I think that piece will lead us right. We could just keep on going down, actually. And we'll start with this piece here. Actually, no, we will not start with that piece. We'll start with the piece directly in front of you.
Okay.
So this was actually alongside the machetero piece with the machete over there. It might be a Fey work. And again, it has the Marroncito figure here. It's called Familia, the Golden Hour. And really this part of the show is dealing more with direct family ties and connection and lineage in a way that is starting to bring it closer to home. So a lot of the work out there is dealing with sort of the cultural influences that are sort of paring down into the familial. And here we're dealing directly with family stories, but also the places that my family is heralding from. So in this particular work, we have palm fronds in the work, but also outside of the work. And there's some contextual meaning for that as well. Palm fronds often being funerary or burial materials, as far back as the Bible, but even in Latin American culture. And that sort of enshrining this really happy moment in my family. It's me, my brother, my mom, and my father on a family vacation. And I think this piece really isn't that deep. It's just about love in its essence. And I think it's a point of reprieve in the show, where some of the other work deals with some heavier content matter. This is sort of a visual break, and it's a bit more colorful and sort of balanced in its color. And notice it also has a domino that is not in response, or it is a response, and it's not a double-sided domino. So it's showing something that I've chosen to sort of hold close to me, even in the midst of all the difficulties with my family, with sunshine, with the golden hour, and all that entails. Next to it is this piece called Padres Nuestros, Ancestral Bridge. I also found this image while archiving, and the background is actually the mountainside in Yauco, where my family is from. And I believe this is an image off of my great-grandmother's property. So there's this beautiful, lush landscape, and this image of my mom's father and my own father standing somewhere nearby. I'm not sure if they were in San Juan or if they were in Yauco. But I had been working with this image for such a long time, and I couldn't ever figure it out. Like, this is one of those examples of just the process of making a work, where it just takes forever. I think I started making this piece in 2016, and I didn't finish it until 2022. And so it was just one of those long gestation periods where I was really trying to figure out the right sort of assortment and arrangement of images to really tell the story of this piece. And so I really like this idea of having a different scope and size to this work. I think a lot of the work is sort of one-to-one in terms of the size of the people in them. But this is one of the first works, and probably the only work in the show, where the Little Prince on the mountainside is so small in comparison, and so it really builds this sense of scope and size in terms of who these men were in this narrative and how much weight they carry in my own perception of who I am and my understanding of my family. And I think, and that also is referenced in the domino piece, so this idea of 2 and 2. So there's two figures here, there's the line, and then there's sort of this I figure, which is referencing the piece that we talked about earlier, and the Little Prince here as well. I'm playing with this idea of what's actually in the composition and its relationship to the domino that I'm using to reference it. And to, really capitalize on the fact that this character, Amaroncito, is traveling through this work. And he's almost like a guide or a friend who's accompanying the viewer as they're experiencing and they're trying to piece together these different snippets of the work so far. And I think we'll move, before we go into the room and talk about this piece and how it'll get us into the room, I think this was a fitting piece for this space back here. And this is another work that took me a long time to finish, and it's taken so many different forms. But it was another instance of me dealing directly with the present moment and allowing that to influence my creation process. So after I had went back to commuting during college, I had to find a space in my family home to have a studio. And so I actually ended up converting my parents' old bedroom into a studio. And in the process of doing that, I had stripped a lot of the wallpaper and repainted the room. But I had collected several fragments of that wallpaper. And in doing that, I actually started peeling up the wallpaper of the previous homeowner, and the previous homeowner before that. And it got me thinking poetically about that sort of old saying about like the things that are in between the walls and the stories that are in a home, and how those things are sort of residual energies in a space. And it made me think a lot about that metaphor in relationship to my own understanding of my own family's history in our home. And so I started conflating and embedding images of my father, these little ghostly, painterly drawings of ghosts and disembodied figures, this idea of the moon and referencing nighttime, and this lithography print of me and my mother embracing me and sort of providing security in the midst of sort of an uncertain scene. And so that's kind of talks about the wall piece. And then we have the ironing board and my father's shirts here. And this is actually the ironing board that would have been propped up against the very wall that this wallpaper is from. And where my mom would be ironing my father's clothes, me and my brother's clothes, to make sure we had our school clothes ready to go, our Sunday best ready to go. And so even if you get close to it, you'll see the burn marks and you'll see the wear and tear over time of my mother's love and hard work and dedication toward this particular expression of love. And I think that's really important to keep in mind. And it's a really important element. I really wanted to capture, really for the first time in my work up to that point, remnants of not only my father's story, but my mother's story as well, and how those two things converged at several different points. And I think this piece really exists as an intersection of those things in a really visceral and real way. So I think from here, we'll actually head to this work, and it's intentionally here because this is actually the back entrance to my home. And so when you think of like a back door, you think the only people who are really accessing a home through the back door are people who know you, or close friends, family members, whoever they might be. And so this is actually me on my first day of kindergarten, I believe. I hope I wasn't preschool. I'd be a big preschooler. But I probably was a big preschooler, but this was my first day of school nonetheless, and I'm all decked out in my dinosaur shirt, and I'm ready to go. And this piece too has some poems sort of sprinkled throughout, and these childlike, again, ghostly figures that are surrounding and shrouding this experience. And I think this piece is really referencing time, not only because obviously I have watches hanging off of it, but also because when you experience grief and loss, even the happy memory can be corrupted in a way. And so I really wanted to highlight this sense of something pure and innocent being changed in hindsight, and trying to reclaim what that moment meant to me when I was experiencing it, instead of what it meant to me in the shadow of grief, in the shadow of hardship, or whatever other sort of negative feeling or experience I was going through at that time. And it says here, I miss the way your voices told stories. And so it's this sense of, and of course the work is called Landin and the Tree, Faces in the Spirit Pine. And that's what this background is, this pine tree that exists right across, like exactly where I'd be facing in this image. I'd be facing this tree on the other side of my garage. And so I've grown up with this pine tree sort of looming over my house, and casting shadows at different parts of the year over the backyard. And so I had like this almost spiritual connection to this tree. And so I found it fitting for that to be sort of the backdrop for this internal conversation around memory and this reclaiming a positive and warm thought that I had lost. And so that actually, now that we are at the back door, we might as well go into the home. So we can all just filter in here. Yeah, come on in. Don't be shy, we got some space.
Oh yeah, please, everybody come in.
Yeah, that's cool. So that piece is directly, the piece that we just talked about is directly connected to this particular work, which is called Maroncito's Compass. And this is an image of our family kitchen. And so it's me and my mom bathing my little brother for the first time. My father is holding the camera. So even when he's not in the image, he's still present. And Maroncito, again, follows us as we move through this work. Above that is my grandfather holding me very close. And again, this piece is about this idea of warmth, this idea of comfort, and being surrounded by loved ones. Even just in the way the image is arranged, and the way the bodies and the people are connected through the imagery. I really wanted to remember these moments and really hold them close. I also have this tiny rooster sculpture that my brother lent to me, and my grandfather had a chicken coop. He used to be a chicken fighter, so that was one of his pastimes, and it's not uncommon in Puerto Rican culture for men to be that way. But the rooster symbolizes strength and sort of leader of the pack mentality, and I think my grandfather did that in a very soft and tender and meaningful way. So I could talk a lot about my grandfather. I feel like he was the opposite of like being machismo and really macho, and you could see that in the way he's holding me in this piece. He wasn't afraid to show compassion and tenderness. And that really brings us to what I think is a sort of culminating and really most personal aspect of this work, which are these three altar forms. And we could start here because this is an origin point. Sorry, I'm shifting you all around. But this is called,
where we want you.
no, you're trapped. But this work is titled 727 Precious Moments and the Blankets That Covers Them. And 727 was the exact time I was born, on June 19th, 1996. And all of these blankets belonged to me at different points in my life. That was the pillow that I took home from the hospital that first night, and the nursery blankets all the way down to some of my bed sheets, and my beloved Mickey Mouse blanket that I still love to this day. And again, I think a lot of this room is focused on highlighting the importance of objects in terms of understanding family history and lineage, and how objects are a material and a form to help us communicate with each other, and help us understand each other even in the here and now. And so I have a baby set of dominoes wedged in between, which are referencing sort of the birth of this concept in a way, of this larger concept that is throughout the show, and also my father giving me my first haircut. And again, I'm thinking, if you look at Mickey Mouse and the way he's arranged, it's almost like these blankets are the head, and Mickey Mouse's body sort of are present. So I'm thinking about these in relationship to the human form as well, and what it would mean for these particular blankets to have such personal value, to be in place of a head, of a figure, especially Mickey Mouse. And directly across from that is this sculpture, or this altar form sculpture that I dedicated to my father, and it's called Mirando lo Invisible, for Hector Luis, which was my father's name. And that means seeing the invisible, which was what the original show that I had this work from was titled, Seeing the Invisible. And that it's also something directly from The Little Prince, that they talk about what is essential being invisible to the eye, and it's only with the heart that one can see rightly. And so that sort of philosophy is embedded in these particular altar forms, and also the work that I've made up to this point. And all of these objects are objects that belong to my father, or are in direct reference to an experience or memory I had with him. So my father, like I mentioned before, was a carpenter. This was one of his first measuring sticks. It's like the old school ones that kind of compress and fold out. I'm not even sure how old it is, but it's something I inherited from him. This is the only cologne that I have left from him, and so every time, every year, I'll crack it open and I'll take a whiff, and I'm like, oh my god, it's just super evocative of what he smelled like, and brings back a lot of memories. These are his cufflinks. This is the card from the funeral home, the obituary card. This is his personal domino set that I also inherited. An image of my father with my grandmother and my aunt. And this was the handkerchief that was in his casket, and also the cross that he was holding while he was in his casket. So all of these are super personally charged objects, and they're arranged in a very intentional way to just acknowledge and invite him into the story in a different way than I have been able to with just the imagery. And I was excited to have the opportunity to do so again. And the newest addition, because this piece has changed so much over time, was this little bone here. And it's actually red snapper spine. And there's a whole story. The first and last time I've been to Puerto Rico, my father took me to a seaside restaurant where they served me fresh red snapper right out the ocean. And I have this very visceral memory of how good that was. And so late last year, earlier this year, me and my brother went to a restaurant and saw red snapper on the menu. And we had this really meaningful experience with it. And we cracked the spine and we We're like, I'll take this half, you take that half. Just to remember not only this moment, but the moment that this moment is referencing. And so with my half, I felt that it was appropriate for me to offer something my father offered me to the audience through the reference of the spine. And then, of course, we have the rice and beans in the Goya cracker cans. Makes me a little hungry. You know, that's there as well to sort of symbolize what my father grew up eating, what I grew up eating as well. And also his cassette player that he would often make mixtapes from. He would practice recordings of when he was on the radio show. He would do his takes and try to get his perfect commercial going. I actually have some of those cassette tapes of his voice recordings on them. So I felt it was appropriate to reference my father's love for recording and listening to music as well in this particular altar form. Which takes us really to the last piece, which is titled El Principito, which is the direct translation of The Little Prince in Spanish. And the subtitle is Remembering Orlando. So this piece also has a very personal backstory, and it was really the main work that I couldn't make alone. My mother actually helped me make this piece, but this particular work is referencing and is in direct homage to my uncle who passed away in a car accident when he was just a little boy. His name was Orlando, and the thing about that I learned while making this particular body of work is that the way I grieve wasn't necessarily something that started with me. Just like anything else, we learn behaviors and sort of approaches to life from the people who come before us. And so while sort of putting this work and assembling it in an exhibition, I started to really think about how this wasn't just my perspective, that my perspective is a part of many other perspectives. And I really had to get to understand my mother's perspective, my grandmother, and the folks who were still around, and really get the full sense of why I might be the way that I am, or why I might think the way that I am. So with that being said, I thought it was really important for me to bring my mother into, as a collaborator in this work, to really bring it home. And so the objects you see here belong to my uncle. This was his baptism. I forget the other word, it's escaping me, but his baptismal clothes that he wore, and it was also clothes that my brother had worn when he was a baby during the same ritual.
Christening?
Christening, thank you.
That guy was like, oh, I love playing catchphrase.
Yeah. So this is his christening clothes. And one moment that like really changed the way. So we've been having little Principito, Maroncito following us as we've been going through this work. But this piece really recontextualized everything in my own personal understanding. Because when arranging this work, I didn't even know, number one, that any of this clothes was still in any of my family members' possession. But my mom had pulled out this particular green suit.
Oh, goodness.
It's all good. The thing that really captivated me, for those of you who know The Little Prince, is that in the book, he wears a green suit as well. Very much like what you're looking at in this drawer. And everything just kind of came full circle for me. And I started to see The Little Prince not just as an avatar for myself traveling through time, but also referencing an ancestor who was with me as well. And that kind of exploded my brain. Because there's certain things when making art that you don't immediately realize, and you're connecting to things that are a lot deeper than your direct experience in your own direct or immediate perception. And this is one of those moments where everything kind of came together for me in a real way. And so I have this screen print that I had done of the Little Prince sort of in the mix of some, again, these ghostly figures that have appeared throughout all of this work. And in telling the story of my uncle, one of the things, rather traumatically, that was a part of that story was that my family members have recounted is that when he was hit by the car, his shoes had flew off his feet and had landed in the street. And so that was a very heavy detail for me that I wanted to honor in some way. And so that's why the mirror is on the floor, because this entire piece builds a body, similar to this particular altar. And so, but part of that is you complete the sculpture. If you're standing in the right place, your shoes become the shoes of this body. And it's about putting yourself, or putting your shoes into another experience, or the inverse of that in a way. It's sort of playing with that conversation and metaphor. With the shirt at the torso, the hat sort of topping it off. And so this piece is a lot, you know. It's a lot. This room is, I don't know how many of you felt it, but even just like walking into this room from the work outside, there is this internal, external conversation that I'm having. And I think that's one thing I'm really grateful about this space for, is when I showed this before, I didn't have that sort of privacy and then external spatial conversation. And I'm really glad I was able to have that here, because you know, I do encourage you to spend some time in here once it's over. You know, when there's less people, to just like look more closely. But it's definitely a different energy shift, for sure. But really, I think that's we walked through every piece. Yeah, we can go back outside, and I want to open it up for questions, perhaps.
Come back out. So if you guys have any questions for Orlando, if there's any questions in the comments, my videographer can relay them.
I even
to
put a
us.
note in there saying if you have questions, let us know.
You took my job. So do we have any questions from the in-person audience? Oh, yes.
Oh yeah, what's up?
It's a lot, right? You know, you talked about it throughout the talk about how you're bringing this energy, how you're shifting the energy. Over there, you talked about the residual energy, but I'm also thinking about all these objects that carry so much heavy. It's heavy. How do you kind of stay grounded?
That's an amazing question. It's actually the reason why I haven't made a whole lot of art since I installed this show, and even before that. It takes time. I think time, just like what I'm referencing, this work is dealing with time, and it's dealing with how time funnels into the here and now. And this is a lot of funneling. There's a lot of things to funnel down into one cycle. And one thing that I've found that helps me with the grounding is to know when not to make, and to know when to step back and let it talk to you. And so that's one thing that I've been really grateful for, and having the opportunity to show this work again and have it travel, is that it's talking to me differently here than it was talking to me when it was in Youngstown. And I think it's landing on people differently here than it did there. And it's landing on me differently. And knowing that, like, having these objects here is I'm putting a lot of trust in, like, the gallery. And I also have to have a lot of trust in myself. And I have to also have, in a way, I have to honor my family too, because these objects belong to my family, not just me. And so that's a whole other conversation perhaps, but it's one of those things that I'm like working through for the next body of work. Like, how much personal objects exist for the viewer to see, and how do I continue to play with the expectation and the conversation around having such personal things present in the space? I don't have an answer right now,
Yeah.
but what I do know is that this is a human show, and so I'm not really having a whole lot of art world conversations here. I really am just trying to appeal to the humanity in people, and I'm talking about family, I'm talking about complex lineages and histories and personal objects that you might have something similar in your own familial story, and they evoke something different for you in your own experience than it does for me. And I think having these objects serves as and the energy related to those objects serve as a sort of point where people can converge at. And separate is to have the differences around what those objects mean, but the object is still there as a point to connect. And so I think that's really what I wanted to hold for this show in bringing the objects, is like, hey, if you trust me to get to share something with you, like, I hope that something can click for you in your own experience, and you can make meaning or have a different perspective on maybe something that you're thinking about in a relationship to family history by seeing this work or by seeing an object in this space that you might not typically see in our show, sort of thing. Does that answer your question?
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
I want to follow up on that, and I want you to know I was listening, because you'd easily say, when I ask my question, my follow-up question, it's pretty much what I just said, Kristen. But to drill into one specific thing that you said, that you take time, there's listening sessions where you see that you stop making, and there's listening sessions. And in those listening sessions, I'm wondering if you're hearing more the aesthetic process, or if you're hearing more the reliquary, like the spiritual presence of the object that you're contemplating, like, or maybe you're just listening to both of those things, but maybe we don't turn off you're effectively aestheticizing sorrow in a way. And I think about this for artists that aestheticize trauma also, like how do we navigate our relationship to our personal closeness to sorrow and tragedy and trauma, and how do we get into that space of aestheticizing that?
That's a really interesting question as well. Well, let me break down the first part of it. I think in those listening sessions, I've gotten to a point now where I'm really listening for that spiritual, sort of reliquary relationship to an object, and having that be the real root of the work where everything else sort of spawns from. I think most of if not all of the show started in a similar way, but with imagery, with photos. And the work that was in this internal room was dealing more with how energy, evocative energy in an object, can speak similar to how a photograph, but also very differently from a photograph. And so I think that spiritual and that process part probably go hand in hand. Like the process is looking for the spiritual relationship in objects, and having that be like sort of the value system. Like if this object doesn't provoke something for me, it's not going to be in here.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Like that, and so
we might also call that the aesthetic process too.
Right. Yeah. And so I think that's one part of it, right? And the other part of it would be, I'm trying to think. What's the second part of your question?
Well, just how we turn off aesthetic decisions long enough to be sorrowful, long enough to grieve, long enough to visit the things we're looking at, the material we're getting ready to make an artwork with, especially for artists that make work from personal affects. It must take this bridge somewhere. It has to happen where you commit the thing to art. And I'm not saying you have to, once it's committed to art, you have to let go of it as a spiritual object also. But maybe those two things just exist together forever after it's crossed over.
Yeah, and I think to bring it full circle to what I was saying at the top, that's where the game of dominoes comes in. It's a way to both step into the social experience and in and out of this personal experience. So a lot of what this show is talking about can be things that emerge from playing a game of dominoes with a group of people for any extended period of time. It's a social experience where you're having these sort of conversations that dip in and out of personal and general and everything in between, sort of storytelling and sharing of yourself to one another and listening and sort of partaking in that community building experience. And so I think that's the thing that brings it all back. There's this other sort of universal reference and entry point for this work to be connected to that allow, well, for one, they encourage this sense of, they encourage this thought of like social gaming and how social gaming often are vehicles for storytelling, and where a lot of these stories sort of came out of social gaming experiences. Like that's how I kind of learned a lot of these things, is playing dominoes, playing cards, playing board games with family, and just like shooting the shit, and just like talking for several hours. And sometimes we'd have really serious conversations. Sometimes we would just have playful
Banter,
banter, and it's all of that is sort of contained in what dominoes means to me, and also in what this idea of Capicú means, which is working towards agency and strategizing with everyone around you, even if they're your opponent or your teammate, to really make meaning of and put yourself in a position to claim some sense of victory for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I actually think that's a great way to kind of end off the live stream portion. We're about out of time, but please feel free to stick around, talk to Orlando, ask more questions. If you're watching the live stream, you can also ask questions even after it's posted, and I will relay them. Thank you all for joining us. And let's see, once again, the show will be up until March 4th, so you can come see the work in person if you haven't been able to yet. Jennifer Witten is our other exhibiting artist. Her work is in the front part of the gallery. And they're working in kind of similar ways in terms of these spiritual items. And then, let's see, I think that's all I have. So thank you all for joining us. Look out for more events like this. We do workshops, community events. You can look on our Facebook, our Instagram, or on our website at akronsoultrain.org. And that's it for the live stream.
Quick question: can people join a mailing list, or how would people join?
That's all going to be on our website.
Okay.
All going to be on our website to get membership. So I think we'll end the live stream. Thank you for joining us,
Okay.
and continue on.
Do I hit finish?
Yeah.
Okay.